The man in the window, the mystery of the recurring nightmare. It was an ordinary night, or at least it should have been. I was lying in bed with the lights off, trying to relax after another day of school. But then, the nightmare began. It wasn't just any nightmare, but a nightmare that somehow seemed more real than the others. It was a strange feeling, a mix of fear and something inexplicable, as if I were trapped between the world of dreams and reality. Something I couldn't explain. Was lying down, but I wasn't looking at the ceiling. I wasn't seeing anything with my own eyes, but through a strange perspective, as if I were floating above me, watching my own body lying there, motionless. Like a security camera, my vision was distant and cold. I knew I was dreaming, but the feeling of being trapped outside my body filled me with indescribable fear. I tried to move, to swim to my own body, but I couldn't. I could only look and feel the fear intensifying. My hands wouldn't move, my feet were paralyzed, and I was trapped in a nightmare that seemed endless. It was then that something strange caught my attention. I looked at the clock next to my bed, and to my astonishment, I saw that the numbers were moving backwards, as if time was going back. A chill ran down my spine. But that wasn't all. My eyes began to roam the room, and I noticed more details that I didn't remember before. On the wall there were drawings made with crayons, as if they were by a child, but I had never done them. I wasn't the kind of person who liked to draw. The drawings showed a line of people holding hands, all smiling. But there was a small being. In front of them, a smaller figure, which I assumed was me, but I wasn't sure. What gave me the chills was the fact that I had never seen those drawings before. The fear began to tighten even more. I wanted to wake up, but something was stopping me. Every second that passed inside that nightmare seemed like an eternity. Then something even more bizarre happened. In a corner of my room, an old toy train that I had lost years before mysteriously appeared on the floor. It was there as if it had never left its place. My eyes fixed on it, and I knew I wasn't crazy. I was sure that this toy had disappeared from my life a long time ago. Before I could understand what was happening, a strange feeling came over me. Something told me that I was not alone. I felt a presence that I couldn't see, but I knew was there. With an immense effort, I turned my eyes to the window. My heart pounded when I saw the figure of a man just a few inches from the glass. He had short grey hair, and there was a visible cut on his forehead that looked fresh, as if it had just happened. He stared at me, emotionless on his face, as if he was watching me, waiting for something. Fear consumed me. I tried to move, to run, but I couldn't. I couldn't move an inch. The man began to scratch at the window, his nails making a high-pitched chilling sound as he tried in vain to open the glass from the inside out. The sound was dull but piercing, as if it were echoing in my mind. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, but fear paralyzed me. The nightmare repeated itself, and the feeling that it was not just a dream intensified. Each time I woke up, the window was closed and there was no one there. But the feeling that he was really there, that tormented me. When I finally managed to wake up, fear still haunted me. I ran to the window, desperate to check if there was anything strange, but of course there was nothing. No sign of a man, no mark on the window, just the silence of the night and fear. Over time, the frequency of the nightmares increased. Each time I had them, they became more real, more vivid. I began to notice more things, like the sound of his breathing as if he were closer. I told my parents, but they said it was just a phase. Recurring dreams aren't that rare, honey, my mom told me, trying to calm me down. You're just growing up and everything will get better. My dad assured me that they were always there if I needed them. But after one particularly vivid nightmare, I decided to investigate further. I started checking around the house, looking for any sign that someone was actually there, watching me. But there was nothing. No clues, no evidence, just emptiness. And then, after the fourth nightmare, everything stopped. For 6 months, I didn't have any more nightmares. I started to believe that it had all been a phase, that my mind was just making up stories. I even calmed down, living a normal life, like any other kid. But then, everything changed. That night, the nightmare came back. When I looked at the window, I realized something was different. It was open. A cold sensation invaded my body and my heart raced. I tried to move, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed again, like the last time. The cold of the night seemed to be creeping in, as if the man was about to enter my life more directly. I couldn't do anything. I was completely paralyzed. And then the worst part happened. I saw the figure of the man approaching again, his eyes fixed on me. He wasn't scratching the window anymore. He was waiting for something. I knew he was waiting for me. When I finally managed to move, I crawled to the window and confirmed it was closed and locked. Nothing was there, but fear still consumed me. Something was wrong and I didn't know what it was. I told my parents again, trying to find an explanation for the repetition of the nightmares, but what they told me was even more terrifying. My father told me a story about a man named Brian, who had been their friend before I was born. He used to visit me when I was very young. Brian had a cut on his forehead, something I had never been told about until that moment. He disappeared after a disagreement with my father, and I had never seen him again. But somehow my subconscious had brought him back. The story closed like a prison around me. I didn't know what to think, what to believe. But the worst was yet to come. With each nightmare that passed, I felt as if I was being watched, as if something or someone was watching me from somewhere. That night, something happened. When I woke up, the window was open. The fear that consumed me was unbearable, but when I ran to check, I found something even more frightening. It wasn't just the open window. I saw something moving in the darkness of the house. Something I couldn't see clearly, but I knew it was there, waiting for me. What I had feared was finally happening. The man in the window was no longer a simple nightmare. He was real, and I didn't know what he wanted from me. The return of fear. That night was not like the others. The nightmare that seemed to be behind me returned with an intensity that I couldn't comprehend. For weeks I had believed that I was free. But like in a horror story, the past returns unexpectedly, and there is no escape. The window was open. The cold penetrated the room, making my bones tremble, and I felt that I was no longer alone. The air was thick, charged with a sense of oppression, as if something was waiting to manifest itself. The sound of the night was replaced by a disturbing silence. I looked at the window, and it was as if something invisible was watching me, waiting for the right moment. That night, the sleep paralysis was more intense than ever. My mind screamed to wake up, to move my body, but I couldn't. The feeling of helplessness was overwhelming. Fear settled deep inside. It wasn't just the fear that the man in the window was back, but the feeling that something even more terrifying was approaching. Something I couldn't control. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, I managed to move. But what I found when I looked out the window was something that chilled me to the bone. There was no one there, nothing, but the sense of presence was undeniable. It was as if he were there somehow, watching. I ran to the door, slamming it shut. What I was feeling wasn't normal. The fear wasn't just psychological, it was physical, palpable. I could feel the weight of darkness pressing against the walls of my room. Over the next few days, the nightmare continued to recur, each time more vividly. I could no longer distinguish between when I was dreaming and when I was awake. What had started as a simple uneasiness had become an obsession. I needed to understand what was happening. That was when I decided to talk to my parents again. I was older now, but I still couldn't fully understand what was happening. They wouldn't give me clear answers, but something had changed in their behavior. As I began to describe the nightmares in more detail, especially the man in the window, I noticed a subtle change in my parents' expressions. My father, who was normally calm and collected, seemed uneasy. My mother, who was usually soothing, looked at my father with an expression I had never seen before, a mix of concern and fear. "Are you sure about the cut on your forehead?" my father asked, interrupting me abruptly. I was taken aback by the question. "The cut?" I asked. He seemed to hesitate before answering, as if trying to choose the right words. "Yes," he said, his voice deeper than I'd ever heard it. "The cut on the man in your dream. Are you sure he had a cut on his forehead?" I looked at my parents, feeling the tension in the air. "Yes," I said. I'm sure. My father shifted his gaze to my mother, and I saw something pass between them, something I didn't fully understand. I knew they were trying to hide something from me, something that went far beyond the nightmares and the fear I felt. But what was it? Why are you asking this? I asked, now feeling a growing sense of unease. My father was silent for a moment before speaking, but his words carried a weight I hadn't expected. When you were very young, there was a man who used to come to our house, he finally said. His name was Brian. He was a longtime friend of mine from when I was in college. But after a while, he drifted away from us. I didn't know what to say. But what does this have to do with my nightmare? I asked, trying to make sense of the connection. When you were a baby, my mother said, her voice soft but trembling, this man spent a lot of time here. His name was Brian, but he wasn't family. I would stay with you when your father was working, and he would come to visit. But something happened, something that made your father cut ties with him, something serious. I looked at the two of them, trying to comprehend what was happening, but what they were telling me didn't make sense. They were talking about a man I had never met, a man I didn't remember. The name Brian meant nothing to me, but the uneasy feeling in the air told me there was something more, something they were leaving out. My father, with a dark look on his face, continued. I can't go into details. I only know that he had a scar, a cut on his forehead. We don't know what happened to him after that, but I made sure he didn't come near our family anymore, and I don't want you to get involved with this. I didn't know what to think. The name Brian was now engraved in my mind, but it didn't make sense. I didn't remember anything. But then my mother told me something that made me tremble with fear. I know this may be hard to understand, but you were already very young when he disappeared. But your father was very worried about you. He forbade Brian from seeing you. We didn't want you to know this, but maybe your mind started remembering something you didn't understand. Dread took over me. How was this related to my nightmares? I didn't understand how a person from my past, someone I didn't even remember, could be so present in my dreams. As the days passed, the mystery surrounding Brian only deepened. Each night, the nightmares became more vivid. I could no longer distinguish between dream and reality. The man in the window was always there, and now I knew he was a figure from my past, someone who was somehow connected to my childhood and something I couldn't remember. That night, the nightmare returned. But something was different. The man in the window wasn't just watching. He was smiling, and that sinister expression filled me with a sense of terror I had never felt before. The cold intensified, and fear paralyzed me. I woke up feeling his presence still near me, but when I looked out the window, there was nothing there. The only thing left was fear, a fear that seemed to have no end. That was when the truth began to reveal itself. The cut on my forehead, the man's figure, the fragmented memories. It all began to make sense. I wasn't just dreaming. I was reliving a trauma from the past, a trauma that my mind had blocked out. Brian, the man in the window, was real, and he had done something my father had never told me about. But what did he want from me? The days following that conversation with my parents were a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. I was trying to make sense of everything they had told me, but the truth was that none of it made sense. How could my subconscious have brought back a figure I had no memory of? What had really happened between my father and Brian? And most importantly, how was I so sure that the man in the window was this Brian? With each passing day, the feeling that something was wrong intensified. I felt like I was on the verge of a revelation, like I was about to discover something that would change everything. But at the same time, the fear that this revelation would be more terrifying than I could bear kept me from investigating further. That night when I went to sleep, I knew the nightmare would return. With each passing night, the presence of that man grew stronger, more palpable. I could no longer fool myself into thinking it was all just a nightmare. I knew he was there, and I knew that whatever it was somewhere between dreams and reality. This time, the feeling of discomfort started before I even fell asleep. I didn't want to sleep, but fatigue got the better of me. I knew the nightmares would come back, but what scared me most was the idea that maybe I wouldn't be able to wake up again. that maybe it would be too late. The dream began the same way it always did. I saw myself lying in bed, looking down at myself. The clock was there, still running backwards. The drawings on the walls were the same as before. The figure of a man approaching the window, the same expression, the same cut on his forehead. But this time something was different. The man wasn't just watching me, he was smiling. The smile was crooked, distorted, as if it were a mask for something much more sinister. Then, as if the dream had come to life, the door to my room opened. It wasn't just any entrance, but a silent, almost imperceptible entrance. I knew something was about to happen. The man at the window was no longer standing still. He started walking toward me, but he wasn't going to the window. He was moving toward me, closer, closer. I tried to scream, to try to move, but I couldn't. It was at that moment that sleep paralysis returned with full force. I was trapped, immobilized, and the man was there, getting closer and closer, his eyes fixed on mine, his smile widening. I couldn't stand it any longer. The fear I felt was indescribable. But then something surprising happened. The man stopped. He looked at my inert body and with a calmness that terrified me said, "You already knew, didn't you?" At that moment, something clicked in my mind. I was in shock. I couldn't process what he was saying, but the feeling that this had happened before, that all of this was part of a bigger story, became unbearable. Fear gave way to confusion. I no longer knew if I was awake or dreaming. Either Tao, man, or the entity he represented, continued to watch me with that expression of dark wisdom. You know the truth. Everything you fear comes from something buried in your past, something you don't want to see. But I will be here forever. At that moment, the light in the room began to flicker, and the objects in my vision began to distort. The man disappeared, like a mist, and I woke up, or at least I thought I had. I was in a cold sweat, breathing heavily, but something told me that this was not the last time I would see the man at the window. When I woke up, the feeling of dread didn't go away. I jumped up quickly and ran to the window, expecting to see the man there, expecting to see that twisted expression staring back at me. But once again, there was nothing. The fear seemed unfounded, but somehow it was still there in the back of my mind. I knew there was something that wasn't right, something that hadn't yet been revealed. I knew what I had to do. I needed to confront the truth, not just about the nightmares, but about Brian. Something inside me told me that my mind was trying to tell me something, something that was lost in my past, something that I must have forgotten. The next morning, I talked to my parents again. I was determined to find out everything. I insisted that they tell me more about Brian. I needed to know more. I needed to understand what had happened. My father, who had previously avoided the subject, finally gave in and began to talk more openly. Brian was a long-time friend of mine, like I told you, my father began, his voice shaking a little. But he changed. Something happened to him. He started acting strangely. And when you were very young, things started happening. I don't know how to explain it, but your mother and I were worried about how much time he spent with you. What you don't know is that he had an obsession with you. I froze. An obsession? My father continued. He kind of became obsessed with you. And I'm not just talking about a friend caring too much. He wanted you to be dependent on him, to see him as someone more important than us. When I realized that, something inside me told me that I couldn't let you near him. I didn't want you to be involved in something that was beyond our understanding. That's why we cut all ties with him. I was in shock, trying to absorb what my father was saying. I didn't remember any of it, but something inside me told me that he was telling the truth. I looked at my mother, waiting for confirmation, but she was quiet, her eyes filled with tears. "What about the cut on his forehead?" I asked, my voice shaking. Brian was in a car accident before he disappeared. He had that scar. Maybe, just maybe, you remembered that. A child's mind is strange, and sometimes it holds things in that it shouldn't. The weight of those words hit me like a wave. I finally understood. The man in the window wasn't just a figure from my nightmares. He was a manifestation of my fear, of my repressed past. Brian had become something dark in my mind, a presence I couldn't shake. The truth was that he was always there, but my mind had created the man in the window to protect me from a truth I didn't want to face. Over time, the nightmares began to lessen. I don't know if it was because I finally understood what had happened, or if it was because I was more aware of my past, but the man in the window disappeared. I began to realize that my fear did not come from a supernatural entity, but from something buried deep within me, something I did not want to remember. Brian, or the version of him that my mind had created, was no longer a threat. I had faced the past and understood his true nature. But the truth was that, although the nightmares had stopped, the feeling that something was always lurking had never completely gone away. Even now, sometimes, when I am alone in the dark, I feel a presence. It is not the man in the window, but a reminder of my own fears. The mystery I began to solve became a profound learning. The human mind is capable of creating monsters to protect us from past traumas. If you liked this story, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications.